Great, thank you. My name is Janelle Komorowski. I am the Institute for Healthcare Improvement Open School Frontier Nursing University faculty advisor, and I am delighted to have this webinar this evening and be able to present this. I have with me Dr. Heather Clark, who is one of our own faculty members here at Frontier. She attended Santa Barbara Graduate Institute of Pre and Perinatal Psychology, and she's a graduate of the Pre and Perinatal Psychology Educator Certificate Program. She is active in APPPAH's Education Department and has been working with Dr. Dear-Heeley to identify a university to house the pre and perinatal psychology curriculum. She's also working on developing a plan to combine preconception care with pre and perinatal psychology as a model of practice to address perinatal trauma and improve birth outcomes, particularly for women of color. And Dr. Clark is going to be our host tonight, and we'll take it from here and introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Clark, are you there? Okay, I know she had an issue with her laptop, but she is not on, so we will go right ahead then, and perhaps she can jump in at a later point. I am going to be taking down your questions during the discussion or during the webinar and save them for discussion at the end of Dr. Dear-Heeley's presentation. And so we're going to hold all questions to the end. And right now, I will turn it over to Dr. Dear-Heeley. And if you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself and then go right on into your presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Coming through, I hope so. I know you're all probably muted. Thank you for this opportunity to be with all of you tonight. It feels good to be back in the classroom, and I look forward to having this time with you and answering any questions and having a discussion afterwards. I came from academia. I taught for 10 years in human development, 3 years in child and family studies, as well as sociology and women's studies and criminology, but taught classes such as research methods and statistics. I came from birth too. I'd been a childbirth educator and a doula for over 2 decades and had attended a number of births as an apprentice midwife at home birth. When I first discovered APPPAH, my first thought was, how could I have been involved in the birth field for almost 38 years?
Pardon me, just a moment. Yeah. I'm sorry, Dr. Dear-Heeley. Several of the people are saying their sound is very low. Are you able to turn up your volume at all?
I do not see an area where I can turn the volume up anymore.
Misty, do you have any suggestions?
Worst case scenario, if there's not a bad echo in the room where she's at, she can do it without the headset and just reload. That means she'll have to go out and come back in, but her slides will stay in place, and I'll be able to give her presenter right back.
Can I talk louder? Will that help?
I can definitely hear you when you're talking louder, yes.
Okay, why don't I go ahead and make a concerted effort here. Is that better? If we could get just a call back from somebody to see if that's okay.
That's much better.
It sounds excellent on my end.
Okay, great, wonderful, thank you. Okay, I just wanted to say, I've come from academia and I've come from the childbirthing field, and when I found this information, I was astounded. I could not imagine why I had not found it sooner. What I quickly discovered was there was a distinct juxtaposition between intuition, truth with a capital T, and science in the pre and perinatal literature. And it was coming from a lot of different sources, some that might have been at one point considered the periphery sources and others coming, more from the center. So tonight I'd like to invite you to consider what if. What if all of this is right? What if we could have been doing infinitely, and we, I mean myself as well, all better all along? What if we, through embodying some of the principles I'm going to talk to you about tonight, we could make a significant positive impact on babies, mothers, families, and even make advances in changing the world? Hope that becomes a little bit more clear as we go. As Janelle said, we're going to hold questions at the end, so please feel free to jot them down as we're going through. So tonight's discussion, or tonight's talk, is going to be about prenatal and perinatal psychology, creating a new paradigm for working with birthing mothers and babies. I've told you a little bit about me. My PhD is in sociology. I serve as co-director of education at APPPAH. I'm a childbirth educator, trainer, and birth and postpartum doula trainer through BirthWorks. I'm a faculty member for the Birth Equity Leadership Academy. You can see through here. What I'm trying to show you here is I have a pretty solid background in this kind of information, and I again am astounded that I did not come to it sooner than I did. Here's some of my research, and you'll see that I have family violence in here. That I'll address a little bit later in the talk, and I see that is related to pre and perinatal psychology. Just a little bit about APPPAH. This organization's been around for about 35 years. It is a not-for-profit, scientific, educational organization which is out there to educate not only parents but especially professionals. I mean, we want to educate the parents. We're in the process of creating a conscious baby program right now. We offer, as Heather, as Janelle said, Heather has graduated from our pre and perinatal educator certificate program. I administer that program. And we have a journal that's published quarterly, and we also have yearly congresses and bi-yearly summits. So, well, every other year we have every year we have a conference. Anyway, it's a professional organization. I'm trying to impress it upon you. Again, I had no idea they were out there, and this information was out there. So I love this slide. If I could just ask everybody to maybe put their feet on the ground. Close your eyes for a second if you feel comfortable doing that. Just take one or two really good deep breaths. This is a really nice settling picture, and some of this material might challenge you to think things a little bit differently. So let's all get nice and calm at the beginning. I used to tell my students if I didn't rile them up a little bit, I wasn't doing my job. So some of the things to think about and consider. What is pre and perinatal psychology, and why is knowing this information so important? What really informs our choices? I mean, my dissertation was a tri-generational study of beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors about pregnancy, birth, and early mothering, and I found it astounding the influences on how we think. What kinds of opportunities do healthcare providers and midwives and other healthcare professionals have in promoting perinatal and prenatal wellness? And what factors make individuals, including myself, and organizations resistant to change? Because this is something that needs to be done structurally and systemically. We're going to make change. So our learning objectives were already posted for you. So I'm going to talk to you about pre and perinatal psychology, identify some of the applications, fundamental concepts, key issues, and a working knowledge of the research. What we need to remember as we're doing this is that as we embody this paradigm of babies having experiences, we are acting as agents of cultural change. So pre and perinatal psychology, very simply, is an interdisciplinary study about health in body, mind, emotions. Some would also engage the spiritual realm in that, and in enduring responses to patterns to life. So it looks at these really early experiences of the individual, and it goes as far back for many into the prenatal period before birth, and right after the baby is born in the perinatal period. And it starts on the backs literally of people like Frank Lake and Eva Reich and William Emerson, who I'll talk about a little bit, Thomas Fernie, Ray Castellino, John Bowlby, any of the earlier research on attachment, and certainly I've not included here, but more recently, people of the likes of Stephen Porges, who does a lot of work on polyvagal theory. So the idea is that how we deal with stress and trauma in our lives is laid down in really early on. And again, some would argue long before we are even born. And so it creates patterns, and these patterns influence us throughout our entire lives. And the patterns are also often instilled pre-verbally, which means before we had the ability to be able to, talk about them, to even actualize them, long before we even before what was considered nerve myelination. So um, that also makes them difficult to recognize and subsequently access. Now, I'm just going to bring up that in our prenatal and perinatal educator program, we have one-on-one mentors with people, and people do bring up a lot. Our program brings up a lot and allows people to work through some of these things. So the 7 principles of prenatal and perinatal psychology. Very simply, conception, pregnancy, and birth are natural. The babies and the mom share the experience. They're both, it's not just the mom that's pregnant, but it's the baby that's part of the pregnancy as well. That they're conscious, babies are conscious and expressive. They need loving support for the very best development. These first relationships, again from the Attachment Research Foundation for All Relationships, the experiences that our babies go through dramatically affect their development of their brains and the rest of their bodies, and that these imprints from early experiences can be enhanced or transformed at any time, which means that it's never too late if you find that these are presenting issues for you. So the benefits of the work, it teaches you about your emotional self, your thinking, your beliefs. There's all these ancestral patterns that are going on. We're finding now that through studies that I'll talk about later, the Dutch hunger study, there's all this implicit memory that is embodied within the baby and encoded in their bodies. And if you've ever studied mind-body medicine, this is the same kind of information that's coming out of there. So these codes run in the background, and when we experience, especially when we experience stressors in life, they come up, and they manifest in some very interesting ways, and different ways for different people. And we could certainly get into a long discussion about some of the ones that I've experienced and others that I've heard about, but suffice to say for now that this is a deeply held pattern issue, which people may not be aware of. And so it can come out in a variety of ways, as I said: allergies, food issues, financial issues, phobias, compulsive disorders, chronic inflammation and pain, many more things. And so it's been said that about 50% of these health issues come from prenatal experiences. So I'm sure that challenges maybe some of what you've been thinking. So this is kind of a funny oxymoron here. New science emerges because, as you can see, back in 1924, Otto Rank said he thought that difficulties during birth could affect infant psyches in a way that it would affect them the rest of their lives. He was right on target. In 1984, there was an article published in the Canadian Family Physician, and it says, through the combined efforts of embryologists, neuroembryologists, physiologists, obstetricians, pediatricians, look at all of these people, we found that the unborn and newborn child intellectual and emotional development is affected by the psychology of conception, pregnancy, birth, delivery, and the postpartum period, 1984. And yet an article even in 1999 says that, public health has not fully embraced these contributions. So it's time to fully and openly acknowledge this research because it's been a long time. It's been out there. It just, for whatever reason, hasn't been accessible to us. So Ludwig Janice says, again, observations in the field of psychotherapy, every reason to believe that experiences before and during birth remain present in our awareness of our own bodies and in our inner states of experience as a constant background of experience. And this is 1993. I just want to run through because I know we have a limited amount of time, and I really want to give you this sort of primer, if you will, on pre and perinatal psychology, because there's just so much more to know. David Chamberlain said body language, direct form of communication, begins long before formal language occurs and has universal meanings. He said that, they've looked at all of these technologies that we have now, like ultrasound. There appear to be 3 types of prenatal body language: self-initiated, spontaneous movements, and behaviors that are reactive to the environment, and interactive social behaviors. These are behaviors in utero that we can observe through things like ultrasound. So we want to change the paradigm. We need to change the way we see pregnancy and birth, the way we see the yet-to-be-born child, the way we view the mother-infant dyad during labor and birth, the way we treat newborns during labor and immediately after birth. And so the during labor part, like how do we treat newborns? They're still a participant in this process. So pre and perinatal psychology argues that when you're working with the laboring woman, you are also working with the baby. And so if a test needs to be done, do we talk to the baby? Do we say, you know, we're going to do this test? Do we have the mother talk to the baby about what's going on with her during her labor? So this may seem a little out there to some of you, but the research is pretty consistent about this. Changing the way we view parenting, preconception and beyond, and acknowledging that trauma or rupture can occur both prenatally and perinatally, and that again, repair can be found. This idea of I see you, it's changed totally the way that I've started to look at babies and children. Instead of just looking at them, I really see them now. I really watch them and watch their behavior, and I've been just outlandishly astounded at things that I can see that I never saw before. And I realize now in this field that I'm in that there is hope for a lot of these babies. And you can see the difference between the babies who have experienced some sort of prenatal or postnatal trauma and those that have not. So as I said, I come from a family violence background. I'm a domestic abuse counselor, ran a shelter. I've taught family violence for about 20 years. So this is important. I wanted to be able to find a way to anchor it, as I'm sure you will also want to do too. So I just want to, Suzanne Arms, many of you probably know who she is. She says, if we hope to create a nonviolent world where respect and kindness replace fear and hatred, we must begin with how we treat each other at the beginning of life. For that is where our deepest patterns are set. From these roots grow fear and alienation or love and trust. So just keep those words in mind. Won't read all this. Here's Adrian Rain. Love his work, had used it in all of my classes. He wrote a book called The Anatomy of Violence, Biological Roots of Crime. I have a degree in criminal justice, so this really was very meaningful to me. He looks at this biological roots of criminal behavior and neurocriminology, and he recommends a public health approach to violence. He argues that certain genetic, neurological, and physiological factors can predict violent behavior. Among his other claims are that certain insults to the developing brain have a pernicious effect on behavior. Those from the nursery. Many of you may have read this. Robin Carr Morse and Meredith Wiley. Use this again in my family violence class. No doubt that we've got more crimes committed by children and young adults. Their research argues that a chemical wash of toxins from drugs and alcohol, including as well as a mother's stress hormones from rage or fear, can affect the baby's brain development. And so this rage and fear can come up as a result of the way women are treated by their partners and the medical community as well as any of their fearful perceptions of and beliefs about pregnancy and birth. Lloyd DeMoss, one of my other favorites, psychohistorian. He wrote about how human societies restage early trauma in later life in wars and social violence. And he said again, we carry these unconscious images which we recreate, repress memories of conflict and losses we experienced before or during or after our birth. This is significant. We've got all these different people from different areas that are chiming in on this. So we know about the attachment research, and so there is an impact on rejection and separation. And separation, especially in the immediately after birth and in the first few hours, and some will argue years, is significant. Babies instinctively know when they are not wanted. Some people will even say that this occurs as a preconception. For example, a baby who is yet to be born may feel unwanted and feel the effects of being unwanted. These babies are at a much greater risk of social and psychiatric problems, more delinquency, and even some research shows that psychopathic killers, a lot of those family histories, they don't have those early relationships. But even more than the early relationships, it is the feeling of not being wanted. E.B. White wrote in his poem Conch, hold a baby to your ears, you would a shell, sounds of centuries you fear, new centuries foretell. Who can break a baby's code, and which is the older, the listener or his small load, the held or the holder? So that leads us into a discussion of epigenetics. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that. I assume most of you are, if not all of you. term's been around for centuries, although it seems to be a fairly new buzzword these days. This is interesting how this translated with a PDF. So APPA is above and genetics is the gene. And basically what this looks at is the study of how genes influence genes are influenced by the environment. And they impact the genetic structure of human beings, and then these genetic changes are often transmitted through multiple generations. As I mentioned earlier, the Dutch hunger study, I've given you a link here, is one of those. So this study showed that trauma can be inherited through epigenetic changes, and that there's a host of illnesses and mental health issues that have been linked to these mechanisms. Cancer, autoimmune diseases, respiratory, neural behavioral, you can read these here. It's a host of diseases. We are seeing a direct result. These studies were replicated after 9/11, after Hurricane Katrina, and others, but the Dutch hunger study is one of the first. So it leads us also to an understanding of including biomolecular medicine, which looks at the juxtaposition or the interaction, if you will, between human health and disease. And so this kind of research looks at biophysics, cellular dynamics, developmental genetics, epigenetics, chromosome biology, synaptic plasticity, metabolic signaling, and biology. These are people with, lots of degrees and lots of training. Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief is one of his books, says it's the perception of the environment that controls the cell. At human levels, perceptions are beliefs. Our beliefs select our genes and our behaviors. So, if we go and think about this belief piece, right? So our thoughts and feelings and attitudes can affect our health and functioning. And so Kenneth Pelletier talks about the same thing. And so this mind-body connection also allows us to think about women's agency in experiences in terms of the outcomes of pregnancy, birth, and mothering, and what we can do to help with those. I want to just come back. Remember, I'm a sociologist, and I have some significant psychology background, so I really like this stuff. And so this influence of fears, attitudes, and beliefs. Now, you may make the assumption that I'm just talking about the birthing mom, but here I'm also talking about our fears, attitudes, and beliefs as care providers. That's a really important concept here that I want to get across. So, we think about women's fear and attitudes and beliefs about childbirth. What are ours? What are our fears? What are we bringing to the birth? What are we bringing to the room? So there's people who are self-determiners. They have very clear attitudes about birth, natural process, no fear about childbirth. I can think of a number of people I know who have that attitude, and they have really good birthing statistics. There's the take it as it comes. People, no fear, low levels of agreement with any of the, sort of the attitude statements, and then the fearful ones. They're really concerned with the personal impact of birth, pain, control, safety, low levels of agreement with attitudes relating to women's freedom or choice of birth as a natural process. Now, you can think about where you might find yourself there. And is it different in different situations? Certainly, what your experience is and the particular birth that you have, but think about where you relate there. What's all this have to do with prenatal and perinatal psychology? So as we've talked about the mom, facing her emotions, we also have to consider the influence of the father, the partner, about their emotions, and certainly the emotions of the yet-to-be-born child. And as I said, even the practitioner is affected and affected. If a mother is stressed, anxious, or depressed while she's pregnant, research shows that her child's at an increased risk of problems, including ADHD, conduct disorder, emotional problems, impaired cognitive development. And this stress trauma response, again, as I talked about earlier, lives in their nervous system. And so it can take all sorts of different forms and remain totally unconscious until something comes up. Susan Highsmith, who's also one of our mentors for our PPNE program, I've just invited Heather. Heather has just joined us as a mentor. We're thrilled to have her. The majority of practitioners in the field of pre and perinatal psychology would likely agree that in order for society to change prevalent negative beliefs about pregnancy and birth, there needs to be a paradigm shift in the use of a negative language as it refers to pregnancy and birth. And so I just pulled up some of the terms that I've heard over the years. I don't have to read them out here, and maybe better not to because we give them more power. But think about how these words feel to a woman who is ready to give birth, anxious to give birth. Maybe it's her first child. Think about it under different circumstances. If you could apply this maybe to your, something else that hearing those words, you can imagine the impact on you. Yet we use them repeatedly, oftentimes just because they've been normalized. Also examining our beliefs about birth, because as we live, so do we give birth. So here's just another belief systems. I will lose control, or somebody else will have it. These are the negative side over here. I'll end up with a cesarean, or I won't be able to have one. I'll be judged. I don't know who to trust. On the other side, were the more positive affirmations that women's bodies are in fact designed to give birth. The process prepares baby for life outside. And according to Michelle Odant, intense fear in the sense of losing it experienced near the end of labor facilitates the physiological process of birth. And everything as it should be, which were the words of my oldest daughter's obstetrician as he stood by and watched her give birth under her own power. And of course, Harriet Hart again, birth is as safe as life gets. So let's talk a little bit about the autonomic nervous system and polyvagal theory. And again, please understand these are all courses in and of themselves. These are some of the things that we're trying to bring to the university that will help create programs and classes on individualized and more detailed topics. The autonomic nervous system, these are the typical beliefs that it has two components, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic is the fight or flight response. Just to have it stimulated, in the parasympathetic is more of a break, the rest and digest response, kind of like what happens during transition, if you think about it, right? The fight or flight, like, I don't know what to do, I'm in labor, the contractions are coming, but then when a woman goes into transition, she's more in the rest and digest. So you can actually see these processes playing out in labor and birth. So there's a lot of information here. Polyvagal theory. I would strongly recommend that you get one of his books on polyvagal theory. And what has happened is Porges has replaced these old notions of just the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. We know now that our highest strategy level is a mechanism called social engagement. We're visually checking in with people all the time. It involves our eyes, our mouth, and our middle ear, and even our heart. It's our connection. It's kind of an instinctual connection with people. The second one is flight or fight. And the third is freeze. So instead of sympathetic, parasympathetic, we've now moved to social engagement, fight or flight, and freeze. And the freeze mechanism is often seen in babies who don't cry, in mothers who are silent, because the body actually goes into a state of immobility and turns off our registration of pain altogether. So polyvagal theory is used in a lot of trauma work and is integrated into work with ACEs, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. It also really is a great way to, as I said, understand a woman, look at her, watch her, see her, and her yet to be born and born child response. What's going on with them, and I'm sure they're in the same. We're all in the same room. Here's a choral diagram of polyvagal theory. This is what happens during freeze. You can see shame and shutdown and hopelessness and feeling trapped and helpless, numb, disassociated. In our flight and fight stage, we're more panic, anxiety, or worry and concern. And in the social engagement stage, we're grounded, we're curious, we're open, mindful, we're feeling joy. This is the ventral vagal system, and this is the dorsal vagal system. So that you've covered some of it in your studies. So here's some other information over here. So please use this. I can make this PowerPoint available to Janelle if you don't get it off of here. So the influence of stress. Just talk a little bit about this. There's some research out here. I'm working with someone right now on pre and perinatal psychology and postpartum disorder and postpartum mood disorder, PPND. So we know that there's a connection between what a woman eats and doesn't eat and other drugs and chemicals and environmental factors. But what we don't think so much about always, and I'm not sure if we screen for it effectively, is stress. several lines of evidence from this research by Roberts and company here say that evidence that PTSD in women may be associated with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, in children. This is about the maternal stress affecting their biological systems, which in turn negatively impacts the development of a fetus's brain. And this takes place in the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex, and the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal or HPA axis. Others have agreed. Here's additional research here by Dietert and Dietert, Patterson. You can read the names here. Maternal exposure to psychosocial stressors may increase the autism spectrum disorder risk as well, through dysregulation of the mother and the baby's immune function and HPA axis. Higher cortisol, higher inflammation in the brain. Additional impacts. Babies can be hard to settle. One of my PPNE students right now is a sleep therapist, and she works primarily with new babies and young children. And so what we know now, and she's incorporating this into her work, which I'm finding fascinating, is that stress can program a baby's nervous system so that they're very hard to settle. It affects their sleep, their communication, their eating, all of their development. It's a neurological dictum, accepted belief that memory resides in the cortical neurons in the brain. Evidence from studies on genetics, again, epigenetics, organ transplants, you can see that here, support the hypothesis that memory can also be stored in the cells of the body, not just the nerve cells. And so this, this stress can sometimes, and this is where I'm going to start sharing some case histories here, experience as a result of difficult implantation. You're reading that right, difficult implantation, meaning implantation of the fertilized egg in the uterine wall. So Lang, back in '76, said one of his patients in a therapy session said, I feel like I'm clinging to crumbling rocks, liable to be swept away in the torrent, hanging on for dear life, trying to get a foothold, never seeming as though I can get into what I'm doing. One can see a memory such as this may accurately reflect on the experience of difficult implantation. So this is just a taste of the kinds of things that we're looking at, and this has been validated by years of research since then. Remember, this is back in 1976. I mentioned the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. So pre and perinatal psychology looks at this, but they take this ACEs experience, this idea of adverse childhood experiences, back to the prenatal period. And so we would argue that this needs expansion. The number of questions I know has been expanded, but there's more that can be done. So ACEs, adverse childhood experience, harm developing brains, change how we respond to stress. They can damage our immune system so profoundly that the effects show up decades later. And they carry much of the burden, or cause much of the burden of chronic disease, most mental illness, and again, back to the idea of violence, the root of most violence. So let's look at this early childhood adversity and pregnancy outcomes. According to Smith, Gottman, and Yonkers, the preponderance of evidence suggests that major life events and traumatic events that occur during pregnancy predict birth weight and preterm birth, with even more robust effects observed for chronic stressors. Their research supported two hypotheses: that adverse childhood experiences themselves may result in adverse birth outcomes, and that the health behaviors of people who've experienced adverse childhood experiences are implicated in poor pregnancy outcomes, and or adverse childhood experiences result for some in adverse birth outcomes mediated by psychiatric disorders and prenatal smoking. So you can see there's some other factors that come into play here. What they did find was a strong relationship between a high ACE score and preterm birth. And the more points that you have, the higher your score, it's polyvictimization, the greater the increase in risk. So let's just look a little bit at the way that babies experience conception. I know we're getting close on time here, so let me run through some of this. Babies, the whole point of perinatal psychology is the recognition that babies are sentient beings. That means they have the capacity to feel, perceive, or experience subjectively, conscious and having a felt sense. And so the newborn brain, nervous system, and physical senses are in fact active and coordinated long before we imagine that they are. O'Donnell's work on the primal period has established at the first 100 days are critical to the short and term long-term survival of babies, and that this primal period also incorporate the prenatal period as well as the year following birth. These relationships that babies create early on form the relationship for later on, but there's arguments here that these relationships begin, in fact, during pregnancy. We talk about the idea of conscious conception. Babies don't implant for a variety of reasons. Poor endometrial lining, scarring on the uterus from surgeries, anything like that. Emerson and some of his colleagues have suggested that negative impressions about conception and pregnancy from the mother and father can also impact implantation. The idea again comes back to this idea of feeling wanted. Discovery is the moment and when a woman finds out she's pregnancy, and ideally this is a time of celebration, but it isn't always. It can become a time of great questioning. You might not be ready to be a parent. There may be other confounding issues at play here. And so babies have this sense if they are wanted and unwanted. And infants yet to be born and newly born know this, and midwives have long believed and are well aware that there are babies who choose to stay and some that choose to leave. They sense the difference in the parent's behavior, whether it's loving and conscious or unconscious, unintentional or negligent. And so infant mortality statistics show this, that unwanted babies have more than twice the risk of death in the first 28 days than those of wanted babies. During the prenatal period, babies, children, and even adults remember. There's the myth that babies don't have feelings, that they have very primitive and poorly developed brains. There's no myelination of the nerves. They have no sense of self and no complex personal memory at birth. Then they don't need their mothers. David Chamberlain, however, discovered that his clients kept having memories of birth. In their birth memories, these babies, now grown up, describe what they experienced during labor and how they were treated by nurses, doctors, and what their parents said and did. You're reading that and hearing that correctly. And again, coming back to the book Remembering Home, Emerson shares the story of a woman who came to him with a daughter who constantly carried around 6 dolls. There's a bigger story here, but this is the Cliff Notes version. Upon talking with the mother, he learned that she had had 6 miscarriages. After she grieved her losses, the girl just immediately stopped carrying the 6 dolls around with her. In terms of prenatal stimulation, we think about, playing baby Bach and things like that. But what we know, based on the work of Renee Vandekar at the Prenatal University in Hayward, California, is that we can actually see differences in early speech, physical growth, parent-infant bonding for parents who were involved in prenatal stimulation. And I'm talking about prenatal stimulation of an entirely different kind, really conscious speaking to the baby and embracing the baby and engaging the baby in the pregnancy as well. We're even seeing higher APPPAH scores by these babies, and they're rated much higher by their mothers, and the mothers rate their births easier than expected. Babies are also always listening. So prenatally stimulated babies exhibit enhanced visual, auditory, linguistic, and motor development. There's a couple of exercises here, but you can look at these. But the whole point was games that parents played with their babies prenatally, that they never shared that information with anyone or with the babies, but babies remembered later. They remembered songs. They engaged in tapping response games. Babies would kick in response to a specific number of taps. It's amazing what some of this psychological and regression research has found. Stories from the womb. Here's one about a woman, she's really scared. What's going on? She then whispered alcohol. They're fighting about alcohol. And turns out that her dad was dying when her mother was pregnant. He was dead before she was 8 months old. It was alcohol related. And she talked to her mother about it, and her mother was astounded. She had never shared that information with anyone. And so there's, despite the fact that you might believe that it's impossible, that in no way could a baby in the womb hear and retain memory, much less comprehend, we have report after report after report, hundreds of thousands of it. The story is long, and it's very troubling. But there was a young woman um, who had she was trained as a nurse anesthetist, and she kept trying to kill herself. And each year, at the same time of the year, she would try to kill herself. It was around the 4th of July. And she found out later that she had been the product of an affair between with her mother and the family doctor. They hypothesized that an abortion had been attempted. One twin remained. That was Jen. Uh, so anyway, she ended up killing herself around the 4th of July. 20 years later, a note came from her mother's caretaker reporting that their mother sometimes wonders if there was any connection between her suicide and an obviously unsuccessful abortion attempt in Uncle P's office, who was the man and the doctor that her mother had had an affair with. This is considered to be a dramatic manifestation of vanishing twin syndrome, but it's also an example of what we study in pre and perinatal psychology. Baby's experience of birth. Thomas Verney says how a child is born, whether it's painful or easy. A lot of Laboyer's work as well. Smooth or violence largely determines who he becomes and how he will view the world. So we can have babies that have these incredibly juicy, sensual, pleasurable births, and the moms too. And then we can have babies who experience just the other: induction, drugs, forceps, internal monitors, and things like that. Also, the room that the baby's welcomed into has a huge impact. The temperature, again, going back on a lot of what Laboyer looked at. So we're encouraging people to think about intentional birth, creating that, deliberately creating it. And there's a lot of different ways, but basically, as you can see, meditating, seeking out care providers who honor and respect women, attending positive focused childbirth education and preparation classes, and celebrating their bodies, especially important for women who have been victims of domestic violence and or have eating disorders. Role of obstetric violence. This is taken right to from the organic law on women's right to a violence-free life, and it says obstetric violence is the appropriation of a woman's body and reproductive processes by health personnel in the form of dehumanizing treatment, abusive medicalization, and pathologization of natural processes involving a woman's loss of autonomy and of the capacity to freely make her own decisions about her body and her sexuality, which has negative consequences for her quality of life. And so, we're talking about physical abuse, verbal abuse, discrimination, lack of privacy, detention. These are all from the universal rights of childbearing women. We have to relook at what we're doing. And I again, 30 years in the field, my first doula baby is going to be 30 years old next week, in 2 weeks, and no, next week. And I think 30 years of how my practice could have been very different had I had this information. So the perinatal period, again, Otto Rank, 1924, looking at what's going on. And we realize that, there's a lot of pervasive materialism, medicine, psychology. It doubts the cognitive status of neonates and denies these human aspects of fetal behavior. And so, what we're arguing here is that early parenting actually begins before conception, not only in readying the body, but also in readying the mind. So care of babies during the prenatal period, how are they, how do we take care of them? The vast majority of medical interventions we know interfere with labor, natural labor, birth and bonding. We do the best we can. I know with what we have at the time and the sociocultural environment that we work in, but I'm convinced we can do better. What do we do about how and when the mother receives her child, and how long are they able to spend together? What about the dad? How's the baby fed, breast or bottle? What kinds of support will the mother receive both at the hospital and home? What are the beliefs and attitudes about health care, feeding, sleeping, discipline, all of these things? And to what extent are babies and children truly accepted and emotionally seen? So we want to talk just briefly here about resilience and repair, because we need to look at our own histories and determine how we are parented. It's not just what happened to us as children, but how we've come to terms with it. So parents can become far more attuned. We can help them do that to their own emotions and how comfortable they are expressing them with the people they love and trust. If there has in fact been a difficult birth or a separation between mother and baby, then parents can use these practices such as skin to skin to help repair and support bonding. And since a connected, attuned experience is vital, They can slow down, parenting, slow down. We live in such a rush world. We see so many moms today with their, nursing babies and the cell phone in the other hand. Provide appropriate enriching experiences through touch, music, rhythm, and communication. Role of therapy and process workshops. Myrna Martin has a Birthing Yourself workshop she does. Ray Castellino. We have our Prenatal Perinatal Educator program, which is in fact truly an educational program as well as a certification program. What they do for people who've in fact embodied this effects of trauma created through our understandings, realized through our understandings of pre and perinatal psychology. So we're working at developing a well-regulated nervous system, being aware of patterns and triggers, staying in conscious. Imagine how much baby, maybe shaken baby syndrome that we could eliminate. We could probably eliminate all of it if we worked in things like this. Keeping the adult consciousness and orientation, staying in the present, compassionate reflection of patterns, reinforcement of healthy patterns, and redirection towards new and healthier patterns. So what's the future of pre and perinatal science? Well, we're looking at massive impacts on human development. New research supporting the vital importance of this period is being published regularly and ongoing. Holistic healing trends influenced by advances in pre and perinatal psychology. We're looking at mother-baby friendly initiatives, increases in breastfeeding, initiation rates, and longer breastfeeding, natural birth, home birth for those that want that option, increased awareness and adoption of skin-to-skin practices and policies, and the integration of therapies led by all these advances in neuroscience. It's becoming known as a field also of interpersonal neurobiology. And so the idea here is that an emphasis on pre and perinatal psychology can help eliminate emotional, physical health issues, relationship issues, and decrease violence on both interpersonal and community. And it's clear, look at the world we have today and what's going on. It seems like every week we hear about a school shooting. We know about children who are being traumatized by in family and school and institutional environments and in social environments as well. And we need to take this newfound awareness and this very deliberate and conscious integration of these practices, which will fully support healthy pre and perinatal psychology and human and social development. All in all, what we end up with is a promise to future generations. Here expressed by Thomas Verney, together we can find ways to promote and protect the physical, emotional, and spiritual health of unborn babies and children. I've provided you with a couple pages of references here, but at this point, looking at our time, I would like to open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Sally. That was really very comprehensive and overview of pre and perinatal psychology. I am going to scroll up and see if we can get through as many of these questions as possible.
Welcome back, Heather.
Yeah, let's see. Okay. I think Sandra started us. NICU babies separated from the mother for surgery or life-sustaining procedures act differently, as do the parents, than those that do not have this trauma at birth. Can it be related as a trauma or separation?
Yes, both. Yes, absolutely. What we're finding with the research on NICU babies is that as much touch and communication, like verbal communication, the research on working with people in comas, and so there's this body of science that says that they can't hear anything, and there's a body of science that says that they're aware. They may not be awake, but they're aware. We need to treat babies in the way that we understand that they are both awake and aware, that they're very conscious of what's going on. So I mentioned the idea of, for example, even when you're going to put a monitor on a mom, say, okay, baby, I'm going to listen to your heart for. I mean, it may sound ridiculous to you, but really, what we're seeing is that they really are listening, and they really are aware, and that we can have an influence on their fear in terms of the birth process by explaining things. And so we can do the same thing with NICU babies. We get the moms and dads in there, and of course, when they're not available, we find that nurses and anybody else that's involved with the care of the baby to be talking to them in such a way that they are understanding that they are sentient beings. Look at how many circumcisions, and other surgical procedures have been done on babies in the NICU for years, not believing that they could feel pain. Now we know they certainly do. Research is very clear that these babies do in fact feel pain, and that in itself, the trauma of being in the NICU, in the lights, away from mom, tiny, new, scared, and all the procedures contribute to their trauma.
There were a couple questions, and I'll quote Jennifer Brown, but there were a couple of questions related to sharing certain aspects of pre and perinatal with mothers and imparting fear. So Jennifer wrote, I worry about how to present the mind-body connection with mothers that can't seem to influence their emotions. Suggestion on how not to add to their problems. Dale wrote also, is there a measure of guilt when a child has ADHD or other behavior disorders? Is this assigning that to her? Okay.
Okay, these are great questions. So we deal with this in the pre and perinatal psychology educator certificate program as well, because we've got all these people coming through, and not only in the US, but we're in over 33 countries right now. So the first question was how to talk to the moms, like about this emotional regulation. One of the ways that we can do it is we can be just very open, right? Meeting the mother. I'm all about using a strengths-based perspective and meeting people where they are. One of the other things that we can do is we can model it. We can model it even as we're holding I've got my pop doll back there, but even as we are holding a doll baby and showing them, we can model the types of behavior. I think there's a huge benefit of support groups for women teaching women too. So getting women trained in this, talking to them, the ones that are willing, and then creating support groups for them. So again, meet them where they're at, use a strengths-based perspective, means focusing on what they're doing right and then providing examples for how they could do things otherwise. There's a lot of videos out there. I know Susan Highsmith has a wonderful video called Babies Know. I'm sure I can get a copy and I can send it to Janelle so that she can have that there for your files. But just ways of educating. It's all about educating and remembering, going on to the guilt piece of it. Listen, we all do the best. The important thing to remember is we all do the best we can with the information that we had at the time. I had an amniocentesis. I had a scheduled C-section. I had, all sorts of things going on in my first pregnancy that I thought I was very well educated and I thought I was doing all the right stuff. And I found out that afterwards that I could have done things very differently. And I was not nearly as aware as what I thought that I was. So it's a progression. It's a journey, if you will, in educating women and changing the mindset. If you can look at the work, again, I'm going to pull this back to Bruce Lipton's work and others, Daniel, as well, and in the biology of beliefs. I give a whole presentation on that, which I'd love to talk to you about, but it's called The Biology of Beliefs About Birth. I gave it at a couple of childbirth conferences. And it talks about how we really can create new neural pathways, right? All that brain research is out there. We can create new neural pathways. It just takes repeating the same information over and over. And so what we're losing with, generation by generation is we're losing some of this knowledge. And so we have to bring it. We have to bring it back. It's not about guilt. It's about accepting responsibility for life and who we are. And if it's a child with autism spectrum disorder or ADHD or some other thing going on, it's not about causing it, it's about understanding and then what can you do with it. And so there's a lot of somatic therapy models not only mental health therapy, but somatic therapy. Somatics means about the body, relating to the body, models that can help both the mom and the child, no matter what age that they're at.
Yeah, and I would also say that if somebody's really dressed in guilt, it's probably there's probably some aspect of trauma that they have experienced, either in pregnancy or birth. So at APPPAH, we focus on that, and we also focus on really promote bonding during the prenatal period, which helps a mother to be able to communicate with the baby and work through perhaps some of those issues. Let's move on. We have a lot of questions. Let's see.
Heather, can I just make a note here on something? I just want to. I'm focusing on bonding afterwards and having the mother actually talk to the child and say, hey, I was scared. Hey, I did the best I could. Hey, I didn't know. So that is also part of that conversation.
Yeah, very important. Particularly since babies are so narcissistic, they think it's all about them. Let's see, Dale wrote, are there ways to mitigate the effects of mom's stress during pregnancy on baby after birth? Great question.
Yes, again, during the pregnancy, we can be working with our moms. It just amazes me, you know, I've had 3 birth children and I've had 3 very different experiences. And how we don't really talk about this at prenatal office visits as we could, or in meetings with the moms ahead of time, but being able to open up that conversation. Heather, could you repeat the last part of that question? I'm sorry, I was thinking about something else there a second and lost my train.
I'm not looking at it, but she's asking, is there a way to
of mediating the trauma afterwards? Okay, got it.
Right,
working with her during the pregnancy about, you know, yoga, meditation, walking, you know, deep breathing, all of those things, and then the same things afterwards. Being mindful and aware. Let me tell you a quick story. So I was at a birthday party, and they had this big they had a big tube. You know the tubes the kids crawl through on the ground? They're flexible, like they look like worms. So anyway, I was watching the kids, and a lot of the kids were crawling through, and one kid would start to crawl, and he'd come back, and he'd start to crawl and come back, and he'd start to crawl, and he'd cry, and he'd come back. He was terrified to go through the tube. I learned through reading through many case histories that this is very typical behavior of a baby who had suffered birth trauma and got stuck or had forceps or vacuum extraction. And it turned out that I talked to the mom afterwards, and that confirmed that. And that was just when I say I see babies differently, these are the kinds of things that you see. So again, finding a craniosacral therapist, finding a somatic therapist who can work with the baby and work with the mom, very effective. Amazingly effective.
Also, Dale, particularly if a mom has suffered trauma during birth, you can encourage her to talk to the baby and explain what happened, either eye-to-eye contact or just as the baby goes to sleep. And it really, going back to the nervous system, as Sally pointed out, it really helps to deregulate the sympathetic nervous system, because babies can't regulate on themselves on their own, and increase the parasympathetic and the social. So that really can help a baby settle in. And as Sally said, getting some professionals to perhaps work with the baby.
It moves the baby out of fight, flight, and freeze into a more social environment, which then allows them to bond better and they behave differently.
Absolutely. So Stephanie wrote, so now we know how this thing affect and influence outcomes for mother and infant during labor, birth, and beyond. What can a provider do at, say, an initial pregnancy visit to try to mitigate some of the damage, especially since some stems back to preconception? Or is that a whole nother topic?
That's a whole nother
topic.
That's
a long topic.
That's a long topic. But what I can tell you, here's what I can tell you. I'm working with a local chiropractor who is certified in Webster and, most important, sees a lot of pregnant mamas. I'm working with him with my company, my business of working with prenatal and perinatal trauma and prenatal and perinatal psychology, I've talked to him about changing his intake form to reflect in asking powerful questions. I also have a life coaching background, so I learned about asking powerful questions in ways that engage the person. And so creating a different type of intake form that allows you to screen for some of this and then open up conversations starting with that very first visit. And if necessary, be able to find out what's in your area in terms of resources. And a lot of people who do somatic work do it virtually, can do the talking part virtually. You really want to see them for cranial sacral, obviously, in person. But find out what resources are available in your community and make referrals. I don't know anybody that would turn away a mom who was, who was truly in need of help, and this kind of help early on. And again, allowing her to see, we talk about, taking responsibility, breaking down that word for what's going on, and so we can respond to things that are going on instead of being reactive. So again, modeling and knowing your resources, and changing your intake forms and opening the lines of communication. I think that you will find, if you open these lines of communication, you will be amazed at what you find and what you hear and how you can help. So that means, I guess, let me just follow up and say, that means that you all need to get trained in pre and perinatal psychology, because you can't do this work. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. I have like major years of formal education. I had no idea that this existed, and how critical this could have been, not only for, my own practices, but also my work in academia. My dissertation would have been, significantly, yet I realized I put some of this in it, but didn't know this organization and this material existed.
I think just being mindful that women who come to you for pregnancy are bringing their own traumas, maybe from pre and perinatal and early, and just being mindful of that and opening up the door for any implicit memory they have to surface, and asking questions about, their early memories and their birth experiences. If their mother's still alive, they can have that discussion.
Normalize it.
But I think more importantly, prenatal bonding. That is huge. Promoting those practices and the body work that Sally talked about.
Right. I have that, like I said, in my biology of beliefs presentation, I have all this stuff in mandalas and vision boards and coloring and journaling and all of these things that women can engage in. I mean, even the process of journaling can be immensely helpful.
I guess Janelle will stop us when. So Damaris had written, this is really blowing my mind. I had a really bad experience with my OB and ended up with a miscarriage during that pregnancy. She was really negative. And looking back, I was really stressed, wondering how this affected me and in turn my baby. Sally, I did write her something, but you can go ahead and add your thoughts.
I'm sorry. That's what I have to say. I'm sorry to hear of your experience. There are no words that can, begin to express, how someone can feel after the loss of a baby. Miscarriage, no matter what point the pregnancy is, and certainly, anytime after the baby's born, the loss of a child. Again, we do the best we can with the information that we have on the time. We know about stress. We know about smoking. We know about eating in a certain way. We know about this stuff. But, how is it that some women undergo amazing amounts of stress, seem to handle amazing amounts of stress, and other women do not, right? We all have different patterns, right? These touch points that we talked about earlier, these memories. And, as intelligent, fully functioning women, these early patterns often, come up, and they may in fact interact as well with these other, these outside influences. And I want to, the last thing I want to say here, you also have to understand And it may not have been anything but the baby's decision. And this again comes back to perinatal psychology. It may not have been the right time for that baby's spirit to be with you.
Yeah, I think I
There's
wrote
some real
something to that
interesting
effect.
research in
Oh,
India
okay.
now that they're doing and elsewhere, recognizing this spiritual component. And I just came back from a 5-day intensive training with Jaap van der Wal, who is an anatomist and an embryologist. 5 days of more intense training than I probably got in a whole semester of classes. And, real interesting stuff what he's talking about, the spirit of the baby, and that, it's the baby that makes us pregnant. It's not, it's not the sperm and the egg. It's the baby's decision to implant or not implant. And sometimes it's not the right time for that baby.
Right, exactly. And there's a really easy read book, Spirit Babies. I don't have the author at my fingertips.
Oh yes, Spirit Babies
Um,
is a good one. There's a number of books out there on this. Again, this is a consciousness that's been around for years, but it's always been on the, sort of what I refer to as the woo-woo fringe, right? But the amazing thing is we now know that this is solid research. I tell people this is research by people who have way bigger PhDs than I do in terms of the kinds of science that they do. You know, way deeper research.
we have a question here I want to bring up. At age 2, my very precocious daughter was asked what she remembered about when she came out of mommy's tummy. She knew nothing of the process of birth. She said it was really, really dark. And then it was so light, it hurt my eyes. She was born in a delivery room uh, with a wall to ceiling window on a very sunny April afternoon. Yeah, that's
Babies are so smart. Babies
yeah.
are so smart. They say there's this age, you caught her, I think it's somewhere just between 2 and 3. It's a little different for each baby. That you can, in fact, ask children about their birth experiences and they will tell you. Remember, William Emerson tells a story about, I mean, he's one of the, now has an honorary fellowship from the U.S., National Science Foundation and, a world-renowned PhD in clinical psychology. And he talks about when he was in grad school, he went to therapy because they had to. And he said he had these very compelling somatic experiences. And he stopped and started like 3 or 4 times in the same results. He told the therapist, I think I've had a birth memory. And and he threw up. And then the therapist said, that's not even possible. The nerves, they're not there. The central nervous system isn't functioning. He kept track of his memories, everything that he had experienced. He went back and found his birth records, talked to people who were at the birth and around it, and found out that he had almost 100% agreed correspondence with the memories that he had when he was experiencing this somatic experience in the therapist's office.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Nicole, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to sneak in a few more. Nicole Baker
I'll stay
wrote,
as long as people have questions and want to stay.
as a psych mental health student, I'm looking at this info with a great deal of interest, especially for application. And Sally, I don't know if you know, but we now have a psych mental health nurse practitioner program. We're very excited about that.
That's very cool. I have a friend who does that. She's awesome.
Do you want to
So her
respond to
question.
Nicole, or
Yes, I didn't catch
perhaps it
the
was
question.
more of a comment? She's a psych mental health student, and she's looking at this information with a great deal of interest, especially for application.
Okay. Well, I would say wonderful field of study. I would get I would again. I mean, I would recommend that you consider taking the PPNE Educator Certificate Program. I think it's the equivalent of a master's. I would say that it's the equivalent of a master's. It's 11, soon to be 12 modules long, and each one of them, is pretty concise. But that would be a really great start. And then to move out from there. There's a lot of research out there. I've given a number of sources here, but I would just learn everything you can. I would talk to people. I would engage people in these conversations and stick with it because it is astounding. It is utterly
Yeah,
incomplete. I
it
remember
is.
doing the readings, and Heather, I think you might be able to concur with me here. I remember doing the readings and just being awestruck. My jaw would drop.
There've been a
Fascinating.
number of comments like, I'm sorry,
That's
fantastic
okay. You're good. You're
topics,
good.
very interesting. This was amazing. Thank you for the information. Um, Let me go back to Cherise. Cherise says, I tell some women that they're creating a toxic womb if they have a lot of negativity going on in their pregnancies. Do you want to respond to that? I did
I
send
would,
her.
okay, I'm also a mediator and I specialize in conflict resolution. Okay. I'm also a divorce mediator. So let me say, her comment was you're creating a toxic environment with your toxic thoughts, thereabouts, right?
That's what she tells some women.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would reframe that. I would say, I can help you create a more positive environment for your baby by thinking differently. Are you interested? Can I help you?
Now, a follow-up comment to my
Message.
suggestion that you take a more positive approach, as she said, I'm very positive, but some women need a different approach.
This is
Um,
true. This is true. I appreciate that. So again, remember I said you take people where they are, you meet people where they are and use a strength-based perspective. So, I'm one of those people. I mean, when I go to a therapist, I go to the therapist that treats the therapist. The other ones kick me out because they tell me I know too much, right? So, you have to put that level of understanding with this woman, but I would still work really hard because when we're saying toxic environment, you're creating a toxic environment. Not only is the woman hearing that, but the baby's hearing that.
and I would also say, and I don't want to jump on you, Cherise. If from a pre and perinatal perspective, we acknowledge that this woman, because of her negativity, has been traumatized, maybe as early as in utero, then we want to support her and empower her to move out of that trauma. And so the approach could be more supportive and empowering, and then in turn, again, focus on the pre and perinatal bonding, because that will give the baby different kind of messages too. Um,
I remember everything you say to the mother, the baby also hears. Every emotion that the mother has, baby also feels. So we have to think about what kinds
okay.
of emotions and physical, psychological, physiological states we want to create in the mother, because that is also a mirror image into the baby.
Pam wrote, this is very interesting. As an L&D nurse, I always knew that positive interactions between parents was noticeable at birth, but I never thought about the effect of negative interactions. Thanks for a new perspective.
Oh, you're welcome. And I wrote it actually. I'm thrilled with that comment because I wrote about that in my dissertation. We know about the placebo effect, but I wrote in my dissertation about the nocebo effect. So the nocebo effect is if you think, basically, if you think something's going to go wrong or you think something's wrong, it will be, right? And that influence of negative beliefs. I have read piles and piles. I have a library full of books on this changing, creating new neural pathways. I find brain research utterly fascinating. And so this idea of creating new neural pathways, we're doing it as practitioners
Yeah.
by learning this information. We're doing that, but we are also then in turn imparting that skill onto moms. And
Yeah.
so that the way that we, that I always talk about like the energy in the room. I I've attended a couple hundred births. I'm telling you, there's nothing that irritates me more than people who carry on conversations in the room about when a mom's in labor about, well, where are we going for dinner? And I was out last night and I have to go check this and I have to do that. That is not the kind of energy that needs to be held in a room with a birthing mom. And we get complacent. So I'm putting, all of us in this, we have to become much more mindful, the word, Heather used earlier, about our own behavior and our own energy in the room. Because if you look at mirror neuron research, we know one baby in the nursery starts crying, all the babies in the nursery cry, or more. So we know that if there's energy, negative energy in the room, that the mother and the baby will pick up on that negative energy, and that includes the dad or the partner, the care provider.
There were a couple people, Amy kind of got it started. She said, my mom must have been really stressed, ha ha. And Dale kind of agreed with her. Can I comment? Can I follow up on that? Is that okay with you, Sally? Very possibly your mom was really stressed. A lot of our moms, particularly in the age in which they were having babies, there was and there still is even, but back then there was even less attention given to the emotions of pregnancy for the mother, let alone the baby. I would say as you go through this program, talk to your mom one day. Talk to your moms, and if they're still alive, and just talk about their pregnancy and how they were pregnant with you, and try to get them to feel rather than just talk, so that things might come up for them. It could be tremendously healing.
I did that in
Tremendously.
my classes. I did that in my family violence classes. I spent 2.5 weeks, 2.5 weeks in a family violence class on birth, pregnancy and birth. And my students would invariably always ask me, why are we talking about pregnancy and birth in a family violence class? And my answer was consistently the same. If we get this part right, I probably wouldn't have to teach the rest of the semester.
That is so true. Let's see, I think there may be a couple other comments. Sandra wrote, I did my master's topic on neonatal and maternal bonding after NICU admission. Great.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. Linda wrote, it was great to see all the evidence supporting this topic. Yes, Sally did a wonderful job on that.
Oh, this is, like I said, I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg of what is a 12-month, course of study plus, in this. I'm only touching on some of these points, but it's very intense and it's very amazing and it's just extremely powerful. So I'm happy to be able to share this with you and have this kind of a conversation, and am open if you would like to contact me. If there's more questions, I can take those, but if you would like to contact me, my email address is.
Perhaps you can type it in the chat box,
Type it in
or I can, yeah. Do you have a chat box?
I'm not sure if I can get in there. I am not seeing where I can do it, Heather, and I'm actually afraid to touch anything in case I hit the wrong thing while I'm here. But it's mindfulpractice57@gmail.com. Use that email address. Mindful Practice, mindfulpractice57@gmail.com. And you can also contact Heather. Heather knows how to get a hold of me. But I would welcome anybody that wants to talk to me about this or the program or anything afterwards. Would openly welcome those conversations. Do we have any more questions or comments?
Yes, Sandra said, more of a comment. I had no idea that there was this type of research and a body of evidence. It opens a whole new world to us, and thank you for providing this information.
I am not surprised to hear that you didn't know about this, and I am honored to be able to bring this to you, and I hope that I have lit a light, and like I said at the very beginning, what if? Like,
Yeah.
what if? That was the way I initially approached it, like, what if? And just realizing the tremendous, like you said, the amount of research and the wealth of information that's out there. And we're talking solid, I'm the research junkie, right? I want solid scientific evidence. At the same time that I understand that there is the, the qualitative component as well. And that's the beauty of this research, is that it takes both of them. And it's rich. It's incredibly rich. I am wading my way through it. There's
Yeah.
when you have the when you do our program, we give you a membership to the Touch the Future Academy, which is Michael Mendiza. Hours and hours and hours of lectures and different lectures on this topic. It could keep you busy forever.
Kitty, our own Kitty. Kitty is a giant in midwifery, Sally. She's and we at Frontier claim her as ours. We can start right now by watching our language. Midwifery and obstetrics are not interchangeable. No wonder the public is so confused. Do we really claim who we are? And I will say she means as midwives, who we are as midwives.
I want you to be okay. I'm going to give if I could just say something here. So I've worked with a lot of midwives in the last 38 years, right? And I have observed that many midwives really do, in fact, get sucked into the system. I implore you, don't get sucked into the system. Keep your intuition. Keep your truth with a capital T. Learn this information. Apply it however you say, keep your jobs, obviously. But there's people who are Amber Price, who is somebody, she's a midwife. Some of you may know Amber. She's also the vice president of Enrico Hospital in Virginia. And Amber has made amazing strides in the maternity department at Enrico. And her stats are improving. They haven't lost a baby in something, I think I just read, 28 years. They have not lost a baby at this hospital. And they have all of these wonderful birth stats going on. Amber requires that her midwives use this information and that they use this behavior around pregnant moms and around the babies. She knows those babies are listening, and she knows that the impact. And what's happening is her hospital is now making a boatload of money because women are coming from all over to give birth there. We can create this where we work. We can do it. She's living proof that it can be done. And it's what needs to be done if we're really going to change the face of birth. Even if a woman has a cesarean, even if a woman has an emergency cesarean, even if a woman loses a baby, this material can be incorporated and used for her benefit.
Francine wrote, are there any toolkits healthcare providers can use to discuss these formative issues?
Actually, that's a very interesting question. No, and I'm working on it. Talking toolkits for providers, right? Is that what she's saying? Toolkits for providers?
Toolkits healthcare providers, yes, can use to discuss these formative issues. Yeah, that would be great.
APPPAH started some time ago a program called Places of Birth. I am in the process of revitalizing that program, and that will come out of that program. No, there's nothing out there right now.
Nicole wrote, what I'm loving is that this gives further evidence for making mental health care a normal process, not something to be stigmatized. It must be as normal as going for a yearly health exam. Nicole, that is so true. And we're also learning how previous generational physical and emotional health can impact pregnancy outcomes. Tanya wrote, interesting point, Nicole. Robin wrote, I agree, mental health care does not get the respect, attention, or funded needed for a healthy population. Absolutely true.
And the questions on a lot of the questionnaires that people fill out when they go to the doctor's office, they may say like, have you, do you have any mental health but like they end there. They don't give women the opportunity to talk. Some of the other research out here, I think I mentioned some of it, was that, we're looking at if we can reduce prenatal and perinatal trauma. When prenatal and perinatal trauma is reduced, we see reduced incidences of postpartum depression and postpartum mood disorder too. We can impact that by changing our practices and the way we are and our understandings of what's going on.
Another Kitty comment. It was nice Oh, I was once called to sit and comfort a mother with a stillborn. When she asked why, I said there are things that we do not yet understand, and told her the story of the Navajo women who resisted infant resuscitation, saying that the baby will decide whether or not to stay. Great wisdom. It was an enormous help to this mother who was feeling it was her fault. Yeah.
Not fault. It's not about guilt. It's not about assigning blame. It's about education and understanding and repair. Yep.
Someone
What is it,
else.
Heather? I think Emerson said 95% of people experience birth trauma in some way, shape, or form.
Oh,
95%.
absolutely. Will these slides be posted somewhere? I have a few MD co-workers that would find this interesting. Sally?
I can talk to Janelle about that. Uh, what I'd what I'd appreciate is an opportunity to talk to some of your MD friends.
Yeah, I was going to say also there's an MD. I don't know who's very much in an OB, very much involved with APPA. Maybe Amy, you can get in touch with Sally, and I'm blanking out on his name, but he might be a good person to talk to an OB. But yeah,
What would be really great is if we could arrange for some sort of a panel presentation at your school.
yeah, that would be great. Janelle wrote. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I mean that would be an opportunity to get down and then invite nurses, midwives, doctors, invite people in, so we could have a conversation. I'd love to.
Janelle wrote. Oh. I have encouraged mothers who choose to keep their baby but feel negatively about the pregnancy to talk to their baby and tell them, it's my situation right now that is making this hard for me, not you. My love for you is going to grow during the pregnancy, and I welcome you, and I will welcome you when you come. That is beautiful.
Perfect.
That is just perfect.
That's perfect. That's perfect. We talk to women, if they're planning an abortion, talking to the baby, explaining to the baby that it may not be the right time, and talking to that spirit. And sometimes I wonder if I wonder. We see more now that babies choose to leave when they know that it's not the right time for them, or it may not be the right time for the mom. Remember, they're smart. Really, really smart. Far sooner than we ever anticipated.
Totally. Pam was writing to agree with Kitty and said this needs to be addressed both in the CNAP, but also the Pediatric Women's Health section of the FNP and Psych Mental Health. One of my goals is to really integrate, not just my goal, Sally's goal, this material at the university level, and could be Frontier.
If you have suggestions for that, anybody does, please contact me. I would be very, very happy to work with you and discover opportunities for being able to make that happen.
Amy Janelle said the slides will be posted with the link in about 24 hours. How about addressing it? Yeah, Janelle kind of agreed with me that should be in the psych mental health program and primary care FNP. Sandra, you're so right, and Sally can attest to this. A lot of mental health and chronic disease issues that you see in primary care as an FNP, there's early trauma. There's early trauma, and it's when you get involved with this work, you begin to see the whole world through pre and perinatal.
Once you see, you can't unsee anymore.
That is so true.
Once you see, you cannot unsee. It's like again, I was down in this Jaap van der Wal, and he said, once you start seeing sperm and embryo, they're everywhere. You know, when he was showing us example of rock formations and, you know, just things. And it's true. It's like when you're pregnant, right? What do you see? Pregnant bodies everywhere. You're much more aware, and it's increasing awareness. It's
Yeah.
increasing awareness. That's the crux of all of this. It's getting, you know, increasing awareness, reading the literature, learning the new language. It's like, I don't know if any of you know about nonviolent communication and Marshall Rosenberg, but I mean, that's old work, but I mean, that was a completely, he went into foreign countries around the world, you know, countries around the world and worked with, you know, world leaders in nonviolent communication tactics. This is the same kind of thing. We're learning a new way to communicate. We're learning a new way of being. It's not new, though. That's the thing. It's as
Right.
ancient as birth is. We're just way behind the ball. We're catching
Yeah.
up, though.
Sandra said, I ask pregnant moms to read and sing to their babies or tell them stories about themselves. I love it. Woo!
Lovely.
Somebody else wrote in appreciation for having the slides. That was Karen. Brenda commented, very interesting, a personal. I think what you're referring to is perhaps your personal, this material has touched you personally, and that often happens.
Mhm.
It you know, as we talk and you get more involved in pre and perinatal, it kind of triggers some implicit memories within us. I look forward to applying this information to my current practice. I have come across this field of work before, but wasn't sure what it really was. This webinar really helped me to understand. Thank you. That was Nicole Barker. Couple other people just thanking you for this information.
I invite you to come back to this slide if you've been triggered, if it's brought up. You know, anytime we have to question ourselves, change is not easy. You know, anytime we have to sort of question and think about things in a different way, we have to regulate this. And what we realize in a lot of this work is the more we get sort of, I don't want to use the word triggered because I'm that whole academic and trigger warnings thing, but the more we get engaged in this material, the likelier it is that we have our own birth trauma to work through.
Yeah.
Or
Sally, I
other
really want to get to this. I really want to get to this question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This is from Stephanie Walker. Just a comment. Having 6 miscarriages myself, it would have been nice to have some more sensitivity and guidance during those times. It really takes a toll on you, and that support wasn't always the case for me. Thank you for all the information. Wow.
You're welcome very much. And again, I'm sorry. There is a woman, and I'm not going to remember her name. I could probably try to find her. There's a woman I met at a birth conference many years ago plus. And she had written a phenomenal book on miscarriage. She too had had something like 8 miscarriages, and she wrote the book. If I'm not mistaken, she was either a nurse or a midwife or both. And she had written the book from her perspective of what she did not get from her care providers and from the social support and what she really needed and going through that process. And I would encourage you to look for that book because it's packed somewhere amongst.
Yeah. Also, spirit babies. And there's an author I'm blanking out on who herself, she's from the Dengara tribe in West Africa, herself remember leaving the womb multiple times because she just got cold feet each time.
Wasn't ready to
So
go.
I'm offering, because she kind of knew that her life purpose was going to be challenging. So I'm offering your perspective, Stephanie, that you can sit with, that those 6 miscarriages might have been one being who had cold feet each time for whatever reason. So I think the book Sally recommended and also Spirit Babies might be real helpful.
It's
Kristen,
not always about us.
Yeah, a lot of times it isn't with miscarriage.
Right.
how would you address the environment of the birthing room at the hospital in the moment? Great question. Go, Sally.
Oh, as a doula, I did that all the time. I had oh, right to tying the door shut. No, we didn't do that. Um, you know, this is I know women have been doing birth plans for years. I don't like birth plans specifically. I like sort of like birth journey, birth stories. Like, what would my birth look like? And encourage women to, m- think about the things that they want. What would make a what they think would be a good environment, what would be in the room for them, energy-wise and people-wise and everything else. But in terms of our responsibility, I would, if nurses came in or somebody came in or whoever, flicked on the lights because we would keep the lights low. You know, I, we would, if it needed to be up for a procedure, but then afterwards I said, would you mind getting the lights on the way out or I can get them for you? So little things like that, right? So thinking about what the woman might like in terms of if she's got the lights down, if there's a way that you could not come in and turn on all the fluorescent lights, right? I used to practice in a hospital that had a telephone in the room that rang every time it rang into the desk. Okay, so set up the hospital differently so that that kind of thing doesn't happen because the telephone was forever ringing and people were answering it in the room instead of being out at the desk. We can keep lights low. We can um, encourage all the things. I mean, if you think about the Lamont right take, music, lighting, our voices, our conversations, the genre of our language, keeping it always positive. Um, I wrote this in my dissertation as well. There was nothing more infuriating for me to hear said to a birthing woman is, "You don't want your baby to die, do you?" And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that.
Yeah.
Tell you how many times. You don't want your baby to die, do you? You don't want to hurt your baby, do you? And these kinds of threats throw a woman totally into fight, flight, or freeze. I mean, if you want to think of it, go back to polyvagal theory. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, that in itself is traumatizing, not only to the woman, but to the baby. So we really have to think about, we have to think about our language. We have to think about our energy. And you know what? If you find that you're like really frustrated with somebody or you're really having a time, maybe it would be a good idea to have somebody else go in the room. Maybe we've asked for a change.
Yeah.
First I've been at, we've asked for a nurse. Could you like not let that nurse back in the room again? Because she had her own trauma to deal with, which was clearly not repaired. She was bringing all of that to the room for this woman, and it was creating big problems. As soon as she was out of the way, things changed. So you have a tremendous amount of both responsibility and opportunities in the room to create a positive and inviting atmosphere.
Yeah, I would also add to that. It reminds me of a midwife I met a long, long time ago in Philadelphia who used to work specifically with her pregnant families to help them bond and connect with the spirit of their incoming and get to understand what they wanted in their environment for birth. It's a very West African tradition. But we can, as we promote bonding, prenatal bonding with our mother, parents, and baby, unborn, we can also ask them to tune in and get a sense of what the baby might want in the birthing environment, in addition to everything else that Sally mentioned. Kitty said, do you have many men attending these sessions? My husband would have been KO'd to know that he was playing a critical role in our child's outcomes.
Well, Odon's got his own theories about whether or not men should attend birth, and in some cases, he strongly suggests that they don't. I think that this is a prime opportunity. I think that the husband or the partner should be there if they want to be there. If they don't want to be there, then perhaps other arrangements can be made. But we have left the dad and the partners out of these conversations, and they're, I mean, again, going back to the domestic violence field, almost 50% of new cases of domestic violence occur for the first time when a woman's pregnant.
Right.
We need to be working on this, you know, and so the dads need to be involved too. They are important. They have a role. They have an extremely important role, and the baby is hearing them too. There are reports of I went through one of them in the slides where she said, I hear him screaming, I hear him screaming, I'm really small, I'm really small. These are not conversations coming from somebody who's reporting what their experience was after they were born. These are conversations coming from a person who was not even born yet. And she could hear her father yelling and screaming and understood that there was fear. So we need to engage these dads. This is like I said, this is a systemic, you know, issue, and we need to approach it from all levels. So, you know, instead of just the typical childbirth classes, you know, really educate them about things like this, and get them to slow down so that they can regulate themselves as well.
Dale mentioned this is a fascinating subject, and I appreciate your opening with what if. I'm going to read one more comment. Thank you for this information. It is fascinating and seems to be that intuition we have as nurses played out in science. I love that.
Yes, I always knew that, you know, we were smarter than. No, we won't go there. There is a difference. There is a difference. And again, I want to encourage you, don't become what we refer to as men in skirts. Okay, it's a terminology used in sociology. Don't forget this. Don't fall prey to the system, because the system it doesn't generally go to this direction. So we're the ones that have to bring this information up, and we are the ones that need to hold the space and hold the energy for this, and to educate and not get lost in the system, and really understand how important this stuff is, and how we are making a difference. That's why you went into this to begin with. Remember that. Don't lose your intuition. It is always follow your gut. Teach your moms and help them to understand, and the dads, that they need to follow their guts as well. We lose that today. We're all too busy, and yet we don't trust that anymore, and it's a very, very valuable. How many times have you just known something before it happened? That's what you need to listen.
I'm sorry. So Sally, we need to begin to wrap up, just to honor particularly to honor the time of IT staff. Lots of great comments. Sandra wrote, I had therapeutic holds with pediatric patients as a PICU nurse that we use when we have to do horrible things to kids, but not as a FNP. Yeah, that's great. And there's a lot of very simple body work that we can incorporate. So, Sally, any closing comments?
No, I just want to, you know, come back to what I said at the beginning. What if, you know, what if it's sliding here on me? What if this is all right? And I believe it is. I mean, like I said, it takes. I don't impress easily, and that goes for research as well. And I'm impressed. I'm intrigued. I want to know more, and we all need to do that. And I appreciate your being here. I appreciate your interest in your questions and your positive comments. And I would just invite you to don't let this, you know, walk away from this and then forget it, and, you know, and move on. Let me know. Contact me, and I'd be happy to talk with you further about any suggestions that you might have too, for how this work can help you better in your work.
Thank you, Sally. Janelle, do you want to close?
Oh, I just want to say this is amazing, and I could keep going until midnight. And I love your what if, because even if none of this is true, we are not hurting anything by doing this kind of care for women. And if it is true, we are hurting them so badly if we ignore this. So I greatly appreciate this.
I just got total goosebumps when you said that, because that is a truth with a capital T. If this is true, we got to change, like right now, like starting right now. We have to embody this.
Okay. Janelle, do you want to stop the recording?
Yes. Well, I think Misty is